You know, usually when we talk about human virtues, there is this underlying expectation of just universal, uncomplicated goodness.
Right. Yeah. Like it's just a given.
Exactly. We treat certain psychological traits the way we treat, I mean, like drinking water, you don't really question hydration.
No, you just know it's fundamentally good for you.
Yeah, and more is always better. And in our modern culture, there is one specific psychological trait that we treat exactly like water.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just the ultimate, universally celebrated, completely unquestionable good. I am talking, of course, about empathy.
It truly has become the absolute gold standard of human decency.
Yeah, it really has.
If you want to praise someone today, you call them highly empathetic. And if you want to, you know, tear them down, you call them lacking in empathy.
Right, it's like a weapon.
It is. It's the metric by which we basically measure a person's soul.
And it is everywhere. You look at the corporate world, and Fortune 500 companies are pouring tens of millions of dollars into empathy training for their managers.
Yeah, it's a massive industry.
It is. You look at the political landscape, and we literally judge our leaders by their capacity to, like, feel our pain. Parents are constantly bombarded by every parenting blog on the internet with the message that cultivating empathy is the single most important job they have.
Right. It's seen as the magic cure for every social division.
Exactly, the foundation of all morality, the ultimate glue holding civilization together. It is an absolute sacred cow.
Which is, you know, what makes what we are about to discuss highly disruptive.
Oh, I know. It's going to upset some people.
Because when you actually look at the clinical evidence and when you dive into the hard neuroscience, the uncritical celebration of empathy is fundamentally flawed.
Wait, so the idea that it's just pure good is wrong?
Yes, the idea that empathy is an unmitigated good is simply not supported by the evidence.
Wow.
In fact, relying on empathy as your primary moral compass can actively lead to severe burnout, massive systemic bias, and paradoxically, it can even be the psychological engine driving moral atrocities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because what you were saying goes against almost everything we are taught to believe about being a good person.
It does. It requires a profound shift in perspective.
It feels almost heretical to say empathy might be bad. But our mission for this deep dive is to look at the actual unvarnished science behind this sacred cow.
And it's a fascinating journey.
It really is. We are going to explore the highly controversial arguments made by Yale psychologist Paul Bloom in his book Against Empathy.
A brilliant book, by the way.
We are going to break down the surprising neuroscience of how our brains actually process other people's pain.
Right.
We will look at the cultural mechanisms that dictate who we care about, and we are going to reveal why what you, the listener, think is your greatest moral asset might actually be leading you astray.
So to really understand why empathy might be so problematic, we first have to realize that the word empathy itself is, it's a bit of a linguistic trap.
A trap, how so?
Well, we use it as a catch-all term for anything nice or caring.
Yeah.
But in the psychological and neuroscientific literature, empathy isn't just one monolithic thing.
Okay, so it's broken down.
Right. It is actually three completely distinct psychological phenomena.
Oh, wow. 3.
Yeah. And this isn't just semantic hair-splitting. These three types are governed by entirely different neural pathways.
Wait, really? Like different parts of the brain entirely?
Yes, completely different. They serve different evolutionary purposes, and they lead to vastly different behavioral outcomes.
Okay, so the umbrella term is hiding the actual mechanics. If there are 3 different types, let's break them down. Where is the baseline?
The baseline, or the first type, is what researchers call cognitive empathy.
Cognitive, so thinking.
Exactly. You can think of this as a purely intellectual capacity. It is the ability to accurately understand another person's perspective.
Okay, that makes sense.
It involves modeling their mental state, figuring out their underlying beliefs, their emotions, and their situational context.
So it's basically what developmental psychologists call theory of mind, right?
Precisely. The recognition that other people have minds that hold different information than yours.
So cognitive empathy is understanding that someone is sad and logically mapping out why they are sad, but you aren't necessarily, like, crying along with them.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, yeah.
Yeah.
Cognitive empathy does not require you to feel what the other person is feeling.
It's like reading the data of their emotional state.
Exactly. It is purely an understanding, a mapping of their internal world. And because it is primarily an intellectual capacity, a tool for gathering data, it is completely morally neutral.
Morally neutral. Okay, that's interesting.
Right. You can use it for incredibly pro-social purposes, like
Hmm.
resolving a complex conflict with a coworker because you understand their motivations.
Or comforting a friend with exactly the right words, yeah.
But you can also use that exact same tool for incredibly antisocial purposes.
Wait, so by this definition, a master con artist is actually highly empathetic.
Oh, absolutely.
That's wild. It's like having the detailed blueprints to a bank.
That is a perfect analogy.
Because the blueprint itself is neutral. You know, you could be the security guard using it to protect the vault.
Right, or you could be the thief using it to rob the place. But the blueprint, the cognitive empathy, is the same. That analogy perfectly captures the mechanism. Research consistently shows that skilled manipulators, narcissists, and even psychopaths often have entirely intact cognitive empathy.
Actually, psychopaths have high empathy.
Cognitive empathy, yes. Sometimes it's even highly elevated. I mean, if you want to effectively exploit someone, you cannot be blind to their mental state.
Right, you'd fail as a scammer.
Exactly. You have to have a brilliant, almost surgical understanding of their psychology. You need to know exactly what their fears are, what their desires are,
What insecurities they hide, yeah.
and how they will react to very specific stimuli. Understanding other people's mental states is a biological precondition for exploiting them.
Just as much as it is for caring for them. That is terrifying, but looking at it mechanically, it makes total sense. It does.
A successful scammer needs to read the room perfectly to run the scam. They need to know when you are feeling vulnerable.
Exactly.
So if cognitive empathy is just the neutral blueprint, what forces us to cross the line from just understanding the data to actually caring about it?
That brings us to the second type, which is affective empathy. You will sometimes see this referred to in the literature as emotional empathy or empathic concern.
Okay. Affective empathy. Is this the one people usually talk about?
Yes. This is what almost everyone actually means when they use the word empathy in everyday conversation.
Got it.
Affective empathy is the capacity to literally feel something visceral in response to another person's emotional state.
Visceral, so like bodily feeling.
Exactly. It is being moved to tears by their suffering, feeling a knot in your stomach when they are anxious.
Or feeling a physical rush of joy when they succeed.
Right. It is an autonomic emotional resonance.
It's catching their emotion the way you catch a yawn, or, catching a cold. You're suddenly infected by their internal state. Yes, the clinical term is emotional contagion. And while this is the form of empathy most closely linked to the immediate motivation to help someone, it has a massive downside.
Which is?
The vital thing to understand is that it is also the form most closely linked to the severe biological and psychological costs of empathy.
Wait, costs? Like it physically damages you?
Well, when you are constantly absorbing the emotional states of others, you open your own nervous system up to vicarious distress,
Oh, I see.
compassion fatigue, and the profound emotional exhaustion that characterizes burnout. Caregiving professions are plagued by this.
Because carrying someone else's emotional weight is a heavy biological burden.
It is an incredibly heavy burden.
Which logically brings us to the third type. If cognitive is just understanding the data and affective is actually absorbing and feeling the emotion, what is the third option?
The third is compassion. And mastering this distinction is arguably the single most important takeaway from modern psychological research on human connection.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the difference?
Compassion is an emotional response to another's suffering that involves a deep concern for their well-being and a strong motivation to help them. But
what?
and this is the critical mechanical difference, without taking on the full resonance of their emotional state.
Oh, so it is feeling for them, not feeling with them.
Precisely. Feeling for, not feeling with. This distinction isn't just philosophical wordplay.
It actually changes things.
It has massive, measurable, real-world implications. There is an incredible body of research spearheaded by neuroscientists Tania Singer and Olga Klemecki at the Max Planck Institute.
What were they looking for?
They wanted to see if these different concepts actually function differently in the human brain. So they looked at how different types of emotional training affect neural activity.
How did they actually test that, though? I mean, you can't just tell someone, hey, be compassionate, not empathetic, and expect their brain to change instantly.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
They conducted rigorous longitudinal studies. They took participants who had no prior experience with meditation or emotional training and divided them into groups.
Okay, a standard controlled study.
Right. One group was put through intense empathy training, which was specifically designed to increase that effective emotional resonance.
So they were trained to feel with people.
Exactly. They were trained to deeply focus on and simulate the pain of others.
And the other group?
Another group was put through compassion training, which utilized techniques derived from loving-kindness meditation.
Loving kindness. That sounds very different.
It is. This focuses on cultivating feelings of warmth, benevolence, and a strong motivation to help, but explicitly trains the mind not to merge with the suffering itself.
Okay, so they train them, and then what?
They then measured their brain activity using fMRI scans while exposing them to videos of people in distress.
Okay, I am incredibly curious. What were the physiological differences between the two groups?
The results were stark. The group that received the empathy training, the ones practicing feeling with the sufferers, showed increased activation in the brain's pain networks.
Ouch. So they were literally in pain.
Yes. They reported high levels of negative affect, intense personal distress, and a feeling of emotional depletion.
Essentially, training them to feel more of other people's pain just made them exhausted and distressed.
Precisely. But the group that received the compassion training feeling for the sufferers showed an entirely different neural pattern.
Let me guess, no pain networks.
Exactly. Their brain activity shifted away from the pain networks and activated regions associated with reward, affiliation, and positive emotion.
Wait, the reward center?
Yes, the ventral striatum.
So seeing suffering and feeling compassion actually made them feel, like, strong.
It made them feel resilient and highly motivated. They reported an increase in positive affect, a deep sense of connection, and significantly higher rates of actual pro-social helping behavior.
That is wild.
It is. Compassion training built a biological resilience against burnout, whereas effective empathy training actively increased the risk of it.
We are out here in society telling everyone from kindergartners to corporate CEOs that they need to be more empathetic.
And we're using the wrong word.
Right. And the rigorous neuroscientific data from the Max Planck Institute is essentially saying, no, please stop, you're just going to fry your own nervous system.
Exactly.
But knowing that these three types, cognitive, affective, and compassion, result in such vastly different behaviors, we really have to look under the hood.
We do.
What is the mechanism here? How does the brain actually process this transition from observing an action to feeling an emotion?
Well, to truly understand the neuroscience of empathy, we have to address one of the most famous and, frankly, most misunderstood discoveries in modern neuroscience.
Oh, I love a good misunderstood discovery. What is it?
Mirror neurons.
Oh, I've seen these mentioned in almost every pop science article about human connection.
Oh, I'm sure you have.
Aren't they the specific cells that explain why we yawn when other people yawn or why we flinch when someone else gets hit?
That is the highly popularized simplified understanding, yes.
Ah, so it's more complicated.
Much more. The origin story of mirror neurons starts in the 1990s in Giacomo Rizzolatti's laboratory in Parma, Italy.
Okay, setting the scene.
They were conducting research on macaque monkeys, specifically looking at the motor cortex to understand how the brain plans physical movements.
Motor cortex, so movement.
Right. They had electrodes monitoring single neurons in the monkeys' brains. And they discovered these highly specific cells that would fire not only when the monkey performed a distinct physical action like grasping a peanut,
Okay.
but astonishingly, those exact same neurons would also fire when the monkey simply observed a human researcher picking up a peanut.
Wow.
The neuron mirrored the behavior of the other, firing as though the observer were executing the action itself.
I mean, you can see why that caught the public's imagination. That sounds like a massive revolutionary breakthrough.
Oh, it was a genuinely significant discovery for understanding motor cognition.
It's the brain literally bridging the gap between self and other.
Yes, but the problem was what happened over the next 2 decades. The popularization of mirror neurons went completely off the rails.
How so? Like the media exaggerated it.
Massively. Because it was such an elegant, easily understandable concept, it was suddenly touted as the singular neural basis for basically everything that makes us human.
Everything.
Scientists and journalists claimed mirror neurons were the foundation of all human empathy, the reason for the development of human language,
Wow.
the biological basis for the appreciation of art, and the very foundation of complex human civilization.
That is a lot to put on a monkey grasping a peanut.
It was one of the most dramatic cases of scientific overclaiming we have seen in recent history.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me, because it sounds like discovering the alternator in a car and then holding a press conference to claim you've suddenly explained the sociological causes of traffic jams.
That is a brilliant way to frame the disconnect.
Like, yes, the alternator is an incredibly important piece of the machine. The car won't run without it. But it doesn't explain the entire complex system of how millions of humans navigate a city.
That's exactly it. The alternator is necessary for the car to move, but it tells you nothing about traffic laws or driver behavior.
So what's the actual truth with humans and these neurons?
In humans, the existence of mirror neurons was, for a very long time, mostly inferred from fMRI studies. Researchers saw shared activation in general brain regions.
General regions, not specific cells.
Right. Direct, single-cell recording evidence for human mirror neurons remained extremely limited. And more importantly, the idea that this specific lower-level motor neuron mechanism was the root of all complex higher-order human empathy is highly debated today.
It's just too simple, right?
It is largely considered overly reductionist. Empathy is not just mimicking a grasp, it involves complex emotional regulation, memory, and cognitive evaluation.
So if it isn't just one magic empathy neuron lighting up like a Christmas tree, what is actually the mechanism happening in our heads when we feel for someone?
The current, much more nuanced understanding is championed by neuroscientists like Christian Kiesers. He and his colleagues put forward what is called the shared circuits model.
Shared circuits.
Okay. It is less about one magic class of neurons and much more about entire distributed neural systems that have dual functions.
Dual functions, how does that work?
When you observe emotions or sensations in others, your brain activates similar broad neural representations to when you experience those exact emotions yourself.
So it is a whole network lighting up, a symphony of activity rather than a single switch.
Exactly.
Can we map this geography? Like if we go back to our 3 types of empathy, where are they actually living in the brain?
We can map them quite clearly. And this is where the profound distinction between the different types of empathy becomes biologically undeniable.
Let's do it. Where's effective empathy?
Let's look at effective first, that visceral, unmediated feeling with sensation. The neural systems most robustly associated with this are the anterior insula and the anterior cingulate cortex.
The anterior insula. What do those specific areas normally do when we aren't looking at other people? What is their day job?
The anterior insula is fascinating. Its primary function is processing interoceptive signals.
Interoceptive, meaning inside the body.
Yes. Interoception is your brain's perception of the internal physical state of your own body. So the anterior insula is highly active when you are experiencing acute physical pain.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or when you experience visceral, physical, disgust-like smelling rotting meat or tasting sour milk.
Ugh, yeah. So it's an alarm system.
Exactly. What Kiesers and other researchers found is that this exact same area, your biological alarm system, lights up not just when you are in pain, but when you observe someone else in pain.
Oh, I see the mechanism.
It's quite literal.
So connecting this to the listener.
Yeah.
You are sitting on your couch watching a video online, and you see someone skateboarding.
Right
They
on.
jump off a wall, and they completely twist their ankle, and you physically wince. You suck in air through your teeth, and you might even grab your own leg.
Yes, we've all done that.
That is your anterior insula firing. It is literally simulating their physical trauma using your own body's warning system.
Exactly. Your brain is running a highly sophisticated, real-time simulation of their suffering using your own pain hardware. That is the biological reality of effective empathy.
But remember cognitive empathy, the intellectual understanding of someone's mental state, the blueprint.
Right. That relies on entirely different hardware.
Where is that?
Cognitive empathy, or theory of mind, relies much more heavily on regions like the temporoparietal junction and the medial prefrontal cortex.
The prefrontal cortex, that is the higher level evolutionary newer part of the brain, right?
It is, yes.
The part that handles logic, planning, and complex reasoning.
Correct. These regions are central to complex reasoning, working memory, and distinguishing between self and other.
So we aren't just making philosophical distinctions when we separate these terms.
Not at all.
The difference between intellectually understanding someone's pain and actually feeling a physical simulation of it is a literal difference of brain geography.
Exactly. One is a higher order cognitive assessment, and the other is a primal interoceptive alarm bell.
Okay, so our brains are biologically hardwired through evolution to run these simulations. We have dedicated hardware, like the anterior insula, specifically designed to feel what other people feel.
Me too.
From a purely humanistic standpoint, that seems like a beautiful thing. It connects us. It ensures a mother responds to a crying baby.
It absolutely does.
So why on earth does Paul Bloom argue that this exact evolved biological mechanism makes us worse, not better, at ethical decision-making?
Because if we pull back and connect this to the bigger picture of how a society operates, the problem with relying on a biological simulation of pain as your primary moral compass is that biology is incredibly biased.
Biased how?
Well, it evolved to solve local survival problems, not global ethical dilemmas.
Right, the hunter-gatherer thing.
Exactly. Bloom's central argument against empathy rests on the fact that the psychology of our empathic response has built-in systemic flaws that make it wildly unreliable and often dangerous for justice or public policy.
What's the first flaw?
The first major flaw is that empathy is completely innumerate.
Enumerate. Like, it literally cannot do math.
It fundamentally cannot comprehend scale. The empathic response, governed by these older brain regions, was designed by evolution to be triggered by vivid, concrete, identified individuals.
A face in front of you.
Yes, a cry you can hear. It does not, and functionally cannot, respond to statistics representing massive numbers of people. Bloom describes this using a metaphor called the spotlight effect.
The spotlight effect. Okay, paint a picture of how that mechanism works.
Imagine you are in a massive pitch-black theater and a narrow spotlight clicks on, illuminating a single actor standing on the stage.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
You can see their tears, you can see the dirt on their face, you can hear the slight tremor in their voice. Your effective empathy, your anterior insula fires up immediately.
You feel their pain intensely.
Exactly. Your attention is completely captured. But that spotlight is incredibly narrow. What empathy does is illuminate that one identified victim brilliantly, while leaving the statistical millions of other victims completely in the dark.
The millions who might be suffering the exact same fate.
Yes. You simply cannot feel them.
Wow. So because we cannot physically see the millions, our brains cannot simulate their pain.
Exactly.
So our moral compass just doesn't register them.
It is even worse than just not registering them. There is a deeply unsettling psychological phenomenon documented by risk researcher Paul Slovic called the collapse of compassion.
Collapse of compassion, that sounds bad.
It is. Slovic's research shows that our empathic response doesn't just plateau, it actually decreases as the number of victims increases.
Wait, I need to understand that. It goes down. It doesn't even stay at the level of the one person.
It actively drops.
How is that possible?
Slovic conducted experiments where he would show participants a photo of one starving child, let's say a little girl named Rokia, and ask for a charitable donation.
Okay, classic charity appeal.
Right. People feel intense empathy, the anterior insula fires, and they give generously. But if you show participants a photo of Rokia standing next to another starving child, just adding one more identified life, the total empathy and the corresponding donation actually drop slightly.
Really? Just from adding one more kid?
Yes. And if you present them with a fact sheet describing thousands of starving children in a region using statistics and graphs, the empathic response plummets drastically.
That's depressing.
One identified child generates significantly more measurable empathy and financial support than a statistic of millions.
I have to push back on this a little bit, though, because, I mean, isn't it just human nature to care about the person right in front of you?
Yes, of course it is.
We evolved in small hunter-gatherer tribes of maybe 150 people, not global societies of 8 billion. We aren't wired to comprehend spreadsheets of human lives.
That is completely true.
Are we really saying it's ethically unjust or wrong to want to save the one child we can actually see just because we can't save everyone? If we just look at spreadsheets, don't we become cold and calculated? Isn't some emotional grounding necessary so we don't treat humans like mere data points?
You're touching on the exact paradox that makes this so difficult for people to accept. You are completely right about our evolutionary history, and Bloom doesn't deny that. It is entirely natural. Having that emotional grounding is what makes us human. But Bloom's point is that while it is a natural impulse, an ethical system or a public policy built primarily on this biological bias fails to serve broader justice.
Because of the spotlight?
Right. Empathy drives us to care about the one at the expense of the many, precisely because it is a spotlight.
So it forces a misallocation of resources.
Exactly. If a government allocates half its emergency health care funding to save one little girl trapped in a well because she happens to be on the 24-hour news cycle.
Right, her face is on every screen.
And the nation's effective empathy is highly stimulated, but simultaneously ignoring the fact that the exact same funding could save 10,000 children from malaria just by buying mosquito nets.
Wow, put that way, it's pretty stark.
It is a profound failure of moral reasoning. An ethical system that responds more strongly to one identified individual than to 10,000 statistical ones is not serving justice.
It is serving our own biological need for emotional gratification.
Precisely. It feels better to save the girl in the well, but it is mathematically less moral.
Okay, that is a really hard pill to swallow, but the logic is undeniable. Empathy is terrible at scale.
It is.
It forces us to act on what is visible rather than what is impactful. But the flaws don't stop there, do they? Because even when we are dealing with individuals, that spotlight we talked about doesn't just shine randomly.
No, it does not. It has a preference.
It has a massive hardwired preference. And this leads to the second major flaw in Bloom's argument. Empathy is heavily structurally biased toward our in-group.
Research across multiple disciplines consistently demonstrates this. Our empathic resonance is significantly stronger for people we perceive as similar to ourselves.
Similar in what way?
This could mean people of the same ethnicity, the same nationality, the same socioeconomic class, or even just the same ideological community or sports team.
Wait, mechanically speaking, what does that mean? If I see someone who looks like me or votes like me get hurt, my brain literally reacts differently than if it were someone from an outgroup.
It reacts measurably differently. Neuroscience studies using fMRI have shown that the neural response to observed pain, that anterior insula lighting up, is significantly stronger when the person in pain is perceived as a member of the subject's in-group.
And if they are an outgroup member.
When the person in pain is an outgroup member, the anterior insula activation is dampened.
So we literally feel less of their pain.
Yes. And again, from an evolutionary biology perspective, this isn't a failure or a glitch of the brain. This is its intended evolutionary operation.
Because we had to protect our tribe.
Exactly. We evolved to protect our kin and our immediate tribe because resources were scarce. Empathy was the glue that kept the tribe alive against competing tribes.
So empathy is essentially prejudiced by design. It's tribalism wrapped in a warm feeling.
It is inherently partisan. And in a modern interconnected world where we have to share a society with millions of outgroup members, it means that empathy, when it operates without the corrective force of rationality,
It systematically produces stronger moral concern for people exactly like us than for people unlike us.
which is precisely the opposite of what impartial modern moral reasoning and justice require. Justice is supposed to be blind. Empathy is hyper-focused on familiarity.
And because it is partisan, because it is tribal, I imagine it can be weaponized.
This is perhaps the darkest, most unsettling aspect of Bloom's argument and of historical psychology in general.
How so?
Leaders, ideologues, and propagandists have consistently, throughout history, used the intense empathy we feel for our in-group as a tool to generate profound hostility and violence toward an out-group.
Wow. Empathy is not the opposite of violence. It is often the fuel for it.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example of how that actually works mechanically? How do you use a feeling of care to create violence?
Let's look at it historically, purely from the perspective of mass psychology and propaganda mechanics. Consider the citizens of Nazi Germany.
Okay, that's a heavy example.
It is. The popular comforting misconception we often hold is that the population had simply lost their humanity, that they were entirely devoid of empathy, or that they were all clinically psychopathic.
Right, we like to think they were just monsters.
But historical and psychological analysis shows something far more complex and far more disturbing.
Which is?
The population was not inherently incapable of empathy. Rather, their empathy was highly selective, and it was deliberately, methodically weaponized by their leaders.
How exactly did the propaganda machine manipulate that mechanism?
The propaganda of the era didn't primarily start by saying, we must be cruel to outsiders. Humans generally resist unprovoked cruelty.
So what did they do?
Instead, it started by generating intense manufactured empathy for the perceived suffering and vulnerability of the in-group, the German people.
Oh, I see.
The propaganda machine painted a vivid daily picture of the nation as a victim. It highlighted past economic humiliations. It fabricated stories of innocence being corrupted.
Building up that effective empathy.
Yes, and it relentlessly focused on the idea that the nation's children were at existential risk from outsiders.
So they flipped the switch on the anterior insula, but strictly for the in-group. They activated the protective instinct.
Exactly. They maximized the empathic distress the population felt for their own kind. And here is the mechanical psychological trigger.
Go in.
Once that intense empathy and protective instinct is fully activated, the leaders simply directed that protective fury against the chosen out group.
Because they felt their own people were threatened.
Right. The capacity to feel the suffering of one's own people intensely, combined with the capacity to imagine those people as threatened by another group, has driven some of history's most destructive episodes.
That is terrifying.
The in-group bias of empathy perfectly predicts this outcome. If you convince a population that their family is in mortal danger, their empathy for their family will provide the moral justification for almost any atrocity against the perceived threat.
They don't commit violence because they lack empathy.
No, they commit violence because their empathy demands they protect the tribe at all costs.
That is deeply unsettling. It completely dismantles the utopian idea that if you could just feel what others feel, there would be spontaneous world peace.
It really does.
Because feeling what your specific tribe feels while ignoring the rest is exactly the psychological mechanism that starts the wars in the first place.
Precisely. The empathetic response, in its raw, effective form, is a tribal defense mechanism. It is a biological alarm system, not a universal moral compass.
Okay, so if we synthesize what we have so far, empathy systematically fails the masses in favor of the individual because of the spotlight effect.
Yes.
It fails the out-group in favor of the in-group because of evolutionary tribal bias. It is objectively terrible as a foundation for public policy or justice.
It truly is.
But surely there is a place where it shines. What about those one-on-one, intimate caregiving relationships?
Like what?
Like a nurse with a trauma patient or a therapist with a client who is suffering. If you are sitting across from someone in deep distress, you absolutely need empathy to do that job, right?
You absolutely need a profound form of connection to do the work, yes.
What?
But if you rely on effective empathy, that emotional contagion, that anterior scintilla simulation we discussed earlier, it doesn't just fail the patient.
What does it do?
It actually destroys the caregiver. This brings us to the very real occupational hazard known as empathy fatigue.
Also known as compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress, right? I know this plagues nurses, social workers, emergency responders, and therapists.
It's an epidemic in those fields.
But what is mechanically happening to them on a psychological and biological level?
It is a state of progressive emotional and physical exhaustion. It results from sustained, repeated empathic engagement with other people's intense suffering.
Because they're feeling it all day.
Think about the biology. If you are a nurse working in a pediatric oncology ward, or a therapist dealing with severe daily trauma, and you are constantly firing up your anterior insula to literally feel the pain of your patients.
Your nervous system is essentially experiencing a continuous, unbroken stream of vicarious trauma.
Exactly. Your body is reacting as if you are constantly under threat.
It's like an amplifier. If you take a speaker and turn the amplifier up so loud past its intended capacity and you play heavy metal music through it all day, every day.
The speaker eventually just blows out.
Yay! The cone tears, the wires literally melt from the heat of the resistance.
That is exactly what happens, and we can extend that analogy perfectly to the biological response.
What does it look like clinically?
The psychological profile of empathy fatigue includes deep emotional exhaustion, intrusive thoughts about patients when you go home, a reduced sense of personal accomplishment, and a profound inability to disengage the nervous system from work.
And the melting wires part?
But the most tragic symptom, the equivalent of the speaker wires melting, is what the literature calls the depersonalization paradox.
The depersonalization paradox. What does that actually look like in a caregiver?
To use your analogy, it is the body's equivalent of a blown fuse. Imagine a young person drawn to the nursing profession precisely because they have a naturally high empathic orientation.
They care deeply.
They care deeply. Their emotional porosity is high. They feel things strongly. They enter the field, and for years, they sustain intense, effective, empathic engagement with suffering.
And
eventually, their nervous system simply cannot take the toxic overload of cortisol and constant threat response anymore. So to survive biologically, the brain literally cuts the circuit.
it shuts down.
It begins to shut down the emotional resonance pathways. They develop an involuntary emotional distance.
Oh.
They become blunted, highly cynical, or completely depersonalized for the very people they are trying to help.
Oh, man.
They stop seeing them as humans in pain and start seeing them as just the broken leg in room 3.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking. So the profound irony is the people who are drawn to caregiving precisely because they are so empathetic end up losing the exact trait their patients need the most.
Right.
Not because they are bad people, but just as a matter of raw biological survival.
It is deeply tragic irony. They lose their capacity for connection because they connected too intensely.
Wow.
But this is exactly where the research we discussed earlier offers a lifeline. There is a proven antidote.
Oh, good. We need some good news here.
When researchers study caregivers who manage to thrive in high-stress environments for decades without burning out, they find a very specific, trainable protective factor.
Which is what? How do they avoid blowing the fuse?
It goes back to the distinction between empathic distress and empathic concern.
Right, the compassion aspect.
The caregivers who survive and thrive long-term do not emotionally disengage. They don't become cold robots. Instead, they learn to maintain intense empathic concern, compassion.
So they care about the well-being.
They care deeply about the person's well-being. They're highly motivated to heal them, but they do not allow themselves to fall into empathic distress.
They don't absorb it.
Right. They do not neurologically fuse with the patient's emotional state.
Emotional engagement without emotional fusion.
Exactly. And it is vital to note that this is a highly cognitively demanding state to maintain. It does not happen by accident. It requires deliberate cultivation.
You really have to work at it.
You have to train your mind to look at a suffering patient and think, I care about you. I am motivated to help you. I will use all my clinical skills to ease your pain. But your pain is not my pain.
I will not absorb it into my own body.
Yes.
Okay, this brings up a massive structural question. If effective empathy leads to systemic bias on a societal level, and it leads to severe, fuse-blowing caregiver burnout on an individual level.
Why is everyone training for it?
Exactly. Why is there an absolutely massive industry right now dedicated to training people to be more empathetic? Every corporate HR department, every hospital administration seems to be buying into empathy workshops.
It's true. They are everywhere.
Are they genuinely fixing a problem, or are they just making it worse?
The empathy training industry is fascinating because it largely operates on a fundamental misunderstanding of the science.
Really? How so?
It operates on the assumption that empathy is a single, straightforward skill you can just level up, like your typing speed or your public speaking.
Like a video game stat.
Exactly. The empirical evidence for the effectiveness of these programs is much more mixed than the industry brochures will ever admit.
Let me guess. The failure rate goes right back to the difference between cognitive and effective empathy.
You've hit the nail on the head.
If you don't know which one you're training, you're going to mess it up.
The distinction matters entirely for trainability. Cognitive empathy, which remember is perspective-taking, the intellectual understanding of another's mental state, is highly responsive to training.
Okay, so you can train that.
Yes, you can teach a doctor to read body language better. You can teach a corporate manager specific perspective-taking strategies, ask them to actively model their employees' mental state before a performance review, and give them feedback on their accuracy.
That works?
That works. It improves communication.
So you can effectively teach people how to read the blueprints better.
Yes, blueprint reading is a trainable skill. But effective empathy, the autonomic emotional resonance, the anterior insula firing, has much stronger dispositional and neurological determinants.
Meaning you're kind of born with a set level.
It is relatively fixed. Some people are just naturally more emotionally porous than others based on their genetics and early development.
And if an HR workshop tries to force people who aren't naturally porous to be more emotionally porous, or forces people who are already porous to absorb even more,
then we go right back to Tinya Singer's Max Planck research.
the pain network's lighting up.
Empathy training that focuses merely on emotional sensitization alone often just increases participant distress without actually increasing pro-social, helpful behavior.
So it's basically torture for no reason.
If you run a workshop that forces your employees to sit around and absorb everyone else's stress and trauma, you don't build a better team. You just make your employees anxious, defensive, and exhausted.
So what should the training actually be? If a hospital administration or a corporation genuinely wants to improve how their people treat each other and how they treat clients, what is the protocol that the science actually supports?
The goal shouldn't be empathy. It should be compassion.
Shifting the whole goal.
When institutions shift their training from empathy to compassion, specifically using techniques that train the mind to cultivate feelings of warmth and benevolence without requiring emotional contagion, the results are phenomenal.
How does that look in practice?
By shifting the internal goal from "I must feel their pain" to I must cultivate a desire to help, you bypass the toxic biological overload of effective empathy.
You avoid the burnout.
You engage the reward centers of the brain instead of the pain centers. You get happier, more resilient employees who actually help more.
That is a massive paradigm shift. Stop trying to feel everything. Start trying to help from a place of warmth.
Exactly.
But talking about this as a trainable skill makes me wonder about the broader societal implications. How much of this is hardwired biology versus how we are raised?
The nature versus nurture question.
Because if empathy is this fixed biological trait, how do we explain the vast differences we see across different cultures? Are some cultures just naturally, biologically more empathetic than others?
That is a fantastic question, and it introduces a crucial dimension to this: the cultural construction of empathy.
How does culture play into the biology?
While the biological hardware, the anterior insula of the prefrontal cortex, is universal, the expression, the expectation, and the direction of the empathic response vary enormously across different cultures.
Really? It's not the same everywhere.
The research completely challenges the typical Western assumption that empathy is this universal, uniformly expressed capacity that always looks the same everywhere.
Give me a specific example. How does it look differently in practice?
Let's look at the psychometric research comparing East Asian collectivist cultures to individualist Western cultures like the United States or the UK.
Okay.
When researchers administer standard Western-developed empathy questionnaires in East Asian countries, the self-reported scores often come back noticeably lower than Western baselines.
Wait, really? Does that mean collectivist cultures are fundamentally less empathetic?
It seems like it, right?
That seems totally backward. Aren't collectivist cultures, by definition, more focused on the well-being of the group over the individual?
Exactly. It seems paradoxical, and that is precisely why the Western questionnaire is a flawed instrument when applied globally.
Oh, the test itself is wrong.
The Western psychometric scales are designed to measure highly individualized, outward, often verbal expressions of emotional sharing. It measures how loudly you broadcast your effective empathy.
Like saying, I feel your pain out loud.
Right. But when anthropologists and sociologists observe the actual day-to-day behavior in these collectivist cultures, they see massive, profound empathic concern within in-group relationships.
So they are empathetic, they just don't shout about it.
It is just expressed entirely differently. Emotional expression is much more contextually regulated.
How so?
You don't necessarily perform a big, dramatic, tearful display of shared pain. Instead, your empathy manifests as dutiful action.
Subtle things.
Subtle anticipation of the other person's needs without them having to ask, and a deep commitment to maintaining group harmony.
So the biological capacity for empathic concern is exactly the same, but the cultural framework dictates how, when, and to whom it is appropriate to express it.
Yes.
In the West, it's about vocalizing the feeling. In the East, it might be about silently taking on an extra burden so the other person doesn't have to.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It is expressive empathy versus dutiful empathy. And this cultural regulation leads us to, perhaps the most important philosophical concept in the sociology of empathy.
Which is?
The moral circle.
The moral circle. What exactly is that?
The moral circle is a concept popularized by philosopher Peter Singer. It refers to the boundary line drawn by a culture or an individual that dictates who is deemed worthy of moral consideration and empathic concern.
Who counts as us and who is just them.
Exactly.
So looking at the grand sweep of history, what does this all mean for human progress?
It's a big question.
Because if you look back a few thousand years, it seems like we used to only care about our own tiny localized tribe. Now we have concepts like universal human rights, international criminal courts, and even the growing animal rights movement.
Right, the circle is much wider now.
Are we getting more biologically empathetic over time as a species?
Yeah.
Is our anterior insula growing?
This raises the ultimate question about human nature, and the synthesis of evolutionary biology and history provides a very clear, if perhaps surprising answer.
And the answer is?
No, we are not getting biologically more empathetic. A human born today does not have a larger anterior insula or a fundamentally different neurochemical empathy system than a human born 5,000 years ago in a hunter-gatherer tribe.
So we are biologically identical to them.
We have always had the exact same biological capacity to feel intense, affective concern for the few individuals we identify with.
So if the biology hasn't changed, what drove the progress? How did we get from raiding neighboring tribes to writing the Geneva Conventions?
The definition of us changed.
Oh, I see.
The progress we see in history is not an increase in our biological capacity for empathy. It is an expansion of the moral circle.
And how did we expand it?
That expansion is a cognitive, cultural and philosophical achievement. Over centuries, through the hard work of philosophical reasoning, the spread of literacy, storytelling, journalism, and the establishment of laws,
We slowly learn to include more people.
we have slowly, painstakingly expanded the category of individuals who merit our moral concern. We expanded the circle to include people of other tribes, people of other races, women, people with disabilities, and increasingly non-human animals.
And empathy didn't drive that.
Empathy didn't lead that charge. Rational morality, ethical reasoning, and cognitive perspective-taking expanded the circle. Empathy simply followed the new boundaries once rationality had drawn them.
That is incredibly profound. Empathy is just the spotlight, but rationality, philosophy, and culture decide where to point it.
Exactly.
And the goal of human progress is to build a spotlight big enough to cover everyone, even if our biology resists it.
That's the challenge.
So let's bring this grand philosophy down to earth. We have talked about the neuroscience, the evolutionary tribalism, the global cultural shifts. How do we take this understanding and apply it to an everyday Tuesday at the office?
Because it does apply to a Tuesday at the office.
It really does, because, as we established at the beginning, English-speaking professional culture places a massive, sometimes overwhelming premium on sounding empathetic in daily interactions.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And for anyone navigating modern professional and social contexts, especially English learners or international professionals trying to adapt to Western corporate culture, understanding the specific vocabulary of empathy is practically essential for survival.
The vocabulary of empathy.
Empathic communication in English has a very specific, highly recognizable register.
A register, like a specific tone, cadence, and set of culturally agreed upon phrases you are expected to deploy when someone brings you a problem.
Exactly. And the most successful, effective phrases in this register, the ones that actually build trust, are the ones that signal cognitive empathy.
So the blueprint ones.
Right. They signal validation and perspective-taking without falling into the trap of claiming emotional fusion.
Okay, give me some concrete examples. If a colleague comes to me stressed out because a project is failing, what is the good way to sound empathetic without taking on their stress?
The gold standard phrases are those that validate the other person's reality without centering yourself. For example, saying, "I can imagine how frustrating that must be."
I can imagine.
Notice the specific wording there. I can imagine. It explicitly signals perspective-taking. It says to the other person, I am using my cognitive empathy to mentally model your state.
And it notably does not say, I am frustrated too.
Right. It acknowledges the emotion without claiming ownership of it.
Or saying something like, that sounds really difficult.
Yes, perfect.
You are acknowledging their experience, you are validating that their reaction is justified, but you aren't claiming to carry their burden.
Exactly.
You are standing next to them, looking at the mud they are stuck in, rather than jumping into the mud with them.
That is a perfect visualization. You maintain your grounding so you can actually pull them out.
What are some other phrases?
Another excellent, highly effective phrase is simply, I hear you, or that makes complete sense given what you've been through.
Those feel very validating.
They validate the reasonableness of the person's emotional response. They make the person feel deeply seen and understood, which is usually what they're actually looking for.
They don't actually want you to panic alongside them.
Exactly.
Okay, so those are the good ones. The validating, cognitive phrases. What is the bad one? What is the phrase that people think is empathetic but actually makes the listener secretly furious?
Oh, there is a very specific trap. The absolute most dangerous trap of performative empathy in the English language is the phrase, I completely understand how you feel.
Yes, I felt a visceral reaction just hearing you say it.
Most people do.
Whenever a customer service rep or a disconnected manager or even a friend who hasn't been paying attention says that to me, my immediate, overwhelming internal reaction is, no, you absolutely do not.
And you are entirely right. They don't.
It's so patronizing.
And human beings are incredibly evolutionarily skilled at detecting performative empathy. When a consultant or a colleague or a leader responds to a complex, deeply personal concern with a blanket, generic, I completely understand how you feel.
Without demonstrating any specific knowledge of the actual contours of the problem?
Exactly. It backfires completely. They are deploying the hollow vocabulary of empathy, but it actively increases the other person's sense of being isolated and unheard.
It is the conversational equivalent of telling your literature teacher you did the reading, but when they ask you what the book was actually about, you can't name a single character.
That's a great analogy.
You just keep confidently saying, I totally grasp the major themes of the novel. It just proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that you weren't paying attention. It makes the other person feel dismissed and patronized.
Exactly. It is a shortcut that exposes a lack of real care.
So what's the alternative?
The ultimate, actionable takeaway for listeners, particularly regarding professional communication, is that true empathic competence relies on specificity.
Specificity.
You cannot just deploy generic empathic phrases and expect to build connection. You have to show your work.
Show your work. I love that.
You have to verbally demonstrate that you have actually listened to the specific, nuanced content of what they said.
So instead of the generic, I understand how you feel.
You say, I understand that the delay in the supply chain has completely disrupted your Q3 timeline, and I can imagine how incredibly stressful that is when you have to report to the board next week.
Wow, that is so much better. Specificity is the absolute soul of effective cognitive empathy.
It really is.
That is incredibly practical advice. Show your work. Specificity proves you care much more than a heavy emotional sigh ever could, because specificity requires actual attention.
It does. It bridges the gap between simply feeling something uselessly and actually helping effectively.
Okay, what an incredibly wild, paradigm-shifting journey we have been on today.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We started by dismantling one of the biggest, most untouchable sacred cows in our modern culture. We discovered the linguistic trap of the word empathy and learned that a master con artist or a psychopath might actually possess vastly superior cognitive empathy, the ability to read the blueprint, than your average well-meaning person.
Which is still a wild concept.
We looked at the massive scientific overreach regarding the myth of the magic mirror neurons and explored the real shared circuits model.
Right.
Learning how our brains literally use our own biological pain hardware, the anterior insula, to run real-time simulations of the pain of others.
The body's alarm system.
We confronted the really uncomfortable hard truths from Paul Bloom's arguments that empathy fundamentally cannot do math, that it systematically favors the single identified victim over the statistical millions.
The spotlight effect.
And that it is biologically, evolutionarily biased toward our own tribal in-group, which is exactly how it gets weaponized by propaganda to fuel atrocities.
A very dark truth.
We learned the vital burnout-saving difference between just absorbing someone's pain like a blown-out speaker and actively, cognitively cultivating compassion to protect our nervous systems.
Empathic concern versus distress.
And finally, we learned that expanding our moral circle is a triumph of rationality, not biology. And that true empathic communication in English requires specific proof of listening, not just performative phrases.
It is a massive amount of psychological and neuroscientific data to synthesize. But the through line of all this research is remarkably clear.
What's the main takeaway?
If we want to build a truly just society, and if we want to survive as caregivers and friends, we need to elevate our minds above our immediate biological reactions. We cannot rely on the ancient alarm bells of the anterior insula to navigate the ethical complexities of the modern world.
Exactly. We have to use the blueprint, not just the alarm. So here's my direct challenge to you, the listener.
Here we go.
The next time you find yourself getting completely, overwhelmingly exhausted by the tragic images on the 24-hour news cycle, or you feel your own nervous system totally drained by a friend who's constantly unloading their unending drama onto you.
We've all been there.
Remember the science we discussed today. You do not have to absorb their pain to care for them.
In fact, absorbing it might make you less helpful.
Exactly. You are biologically and ethically allowed to protect your anterior insula. Shift your mindset intentionally from effective empathy to active, resilient compassion. Feel for them, figure out structurally how to help, but do not feel with them.
And as you practice that difficult cognitive shift in your daily life, I will leave you with a lingering, deeply philosophical question to chew on.
Let's hear it.
If our neural wiring, the very evolutionary hardware that kept our ancestors alive, makes our emotional empathy inherently biased toward our own in-group, is true, completely impartial compassion, even biologically possible for human beings? Can we ever train our prefrontal cortex to truly care for the statistical stranger halfway across the globe, as much as the child standing right in front of us? Or will we always be fighting our own evolutionary hardware to achieve real justice?
That is a profoundly heavy one to ponder, and it gets to the core of what it means to be human. A massive thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Keep questioning the things everyone else takes for granted. Keep examining the hidden foundations of your own beliefs. And remember, sometimes the things we treat as universally, unassailably good, like drinking water, actually have a massive, complex biological mechanism operating just beneath the surface. Stay curious, protect your peace, and we will see you next time.